What up racer, ItsJerone here and welcome back to yet another F1 2021 league race, and we're here for the second round of the Apex Online Racing Season 23 and we're here at Australia today. Now something I forgot to mention in the first race of the season was to show the calendar, so that's what we're gonna do now. As you can see, it's an 18 race season and we had the season opener at Bahrain last week of course, so today it's Australia. Then next week it might be Russia. We're in a little bit of a discussion whether we want to skip it right now. I'm recording this on a Thursday morning. So Russia basically just declared the war, but let's just not go into any political discussions here. And the rest of the tracks, you know what, I'm actually quite in favor of this calendar. Quite a couple of tracks I really do like. The most horrendous tracks for me are towards the end of the season. Hopefully the leg spikes around Mexico will be fixed by the time we league race there, although, well, we're talking about Codemasters here, so not entirely sure. Abu Dhabi, also not really a fan of that, but I do really like Singapore, Imola, and yeah, quite a couple of good tracks. So now that that's out of the way, let's get into qualifying. As you can see now, we're driving on a dry track, but I can already tell you, for the race itself, it will be wet conditions, so I could use all the soft compound tires in qualifying here. My banker was at 21.7, not too bad, but then going for our first run on the second set, you can see that curb nearly threw me out completely there, so had to back off there in order not to spin. So yeah, just did a little bit of a slow third sector, made sure the tires cooled down a little bit, and we're going to my fastest lap of the session now, cutting the apex at turn 1, try to get on the power as early as possible, and that's the first two corners done. Then braking just after the 100, I actually overshoot the corner a little bit here, don't think I trail brake properly, and I also missed the apex for that left-hander a little bit, so as you can see I lost about half a tenth relative to my delta for the first lap I set in this session. Then we're trying to get on the power as early as possible here, do that quite well, and we gain a bit of time back on the delta. Then braking in a straight line, going out to third gear, and you can use that curve on the left hand side there, and I think I actually did that section pretty well. So going into the fast chicane with the curbs of death if you touch them in the wrong way, and do manage to keep it in 7th gear, which is what I preferred in qualifying, and with 2 tenths up on the delta, braking down to 4th gear, make sure you get the car turned in. Then a tricky final sector, I'm not really strong around this final sector to be honest, and try to get on the power as early as possible here, always struggling with the understeer through this corner, and in the end, you know what, I think this is quite a solid lap for me. A couple of mistakes in sector 1, but not that much more I could have done. So 21.4, and yeah, to be honest, my best time in practice was at 21.2 I believe, or 21.1, so not too disappointed. Also didn't practice too much, but as you could see, I was too late in the pit lane to do another lap, so yeah, didn't really time that well. I was adjusting my setup at the start of the qualifying session for a bit too long and didn't leave myself enough time for 3 runs. So it's Griggs on pole, then Iceman second, Tash and Gabs, the Williams pair in P3 and P4, and we're in the end qualified in P5, so not the best position considering it's a full wet weather race all throughout the race. It will be really difficult to overtake, knew that beforehand, so you know what, something has to happen in order to move up the grid. Let's hopefully get a good start initially, that would really help a lot. You can see the setup here, I actually adjusted it a little bit. I added 1 rear wing and 2 front wing to the setup, and besides that I left everything the same as I had intended to use it in the dries. I didn't do any wet practice for this race, so this was just a bit of a gamble, but I think I learned a bit throughout this game that I actually don't need to adjust my dry setup too much in order to get a good wet setup, just add a little bit of wing essentially. So you can see we're in the full wet weather conditions now, and this formation lap you can always use it a bit in order to get a feel for the track and try to find the limits of the grip a little bit. But we're lining up on the grid with Pedro and Pasti behind us as the 5 red lights are coming on, and they go out really early, and we're off at snail speed trying to get on the power. And we do have a better start than Tash, but I just couldn't move anywhere essentially. And we're boxed in between Tash and Pedro, but you can see Iceman is off on the right hand side. He pins his AlphaTauri into the wall, and immediately we do get a virtual safety car. Tash managed to get the move done on Gabs before the virtual safety car came out, so that's good for him. Meanwhile, we've obviously moved up a position here into P4, so good start I would say. Here we brake really early actually. I wasn't quite sure where the braking point was, but I didn't dare to send it down the inside of Gabs there. And we decided to stay behind for now. So always when you go to wet weather, it's always very tricky. You don't really know which gear you should take each corner. You don't know where a turning in point is. You don't know where the braking point exactly is. So these opening laps are always a bit tentative in full wet weather conditions, as Gabs doesn't manage to make the apex for that right-hander, and we slip down his inside, seize the opportunity, and we move up into the podium positions. So I would say this is a really good opening lap, considering we've moved up 2 places. At the front, Greeks is pulling away already, and we have a 1.5 second gap to Tash. So good opening lap, and we'll skip on, well, not too long actually. But you can see Gabs was definitely struggling, as he already dropped a position to Pedro as well. He was not enjoying these wet weather conditions, I think. And in the meanwhile, we're also closing up to Tash a little bit. So we're making progress in this race, which is good to see. Now, in wet weather races, I usually don't know what to do with my differential, so I just decided to keep it at 92%. As in the meanwhile, you can see Pedro is not in P4 anymore, and that's because he lost traction coming out of that well, right-left combination, and I believe he did put it into a wall, but in the end he was not out of the session, and there's no virtual safety car. In the meanwhile, you can hear I'm getting interrupted by Jeff, and this was really annoying me. He was just every lap telling me to slow down basically in order to get some fuel back, which considering we're 5 laps in and I saved about 0.2 laps of fuel, I knew I would be fine until the end of the race. As now FCJD Wagon, not entirely sure how you pronounce the name honestly, is out of the session, as at that point I was asking Jeff to shut up. So alright, now that that's done, you can see we do have a little bit of tire wear. It's just below 10%, and we're 5 laps into the race. So at this point I was definitely considering the no-stop strategy. Before the race I already thought it would be possible to do a no-stop, and I guess this kind of confirms it, because we did a formation lap, 5 race laps, and we're only up to 10% tire wear, so we should be able to make it on this set of tires until the end of the race. Now we get underway again. It's Pasti in P5, so he of course benefited from that spin from Pedro. Gabs in P4, then Tash is still in second, and Greeks at the front. Now you can see we skipped quite a couple of laps, and Greeks was definitely a lot quicker than Tash, and to be fair I think I was faster than Tash as well, but these wet conditions are so difficult to judge, and I guess the main example here is Gabs, because he lost it coming out of turn 2, and unfortunately for him he drops down all the way to the back of the field, as we have a really close call here between the Williams driver and myself. Nearly ran into the back of him there, and under safety car conditions. Now fortunately it didn't result in any 5-second time penalty, and if you listened carefully there was also a bit of contact between Andre Ivan and Pasti there, both essentially making the same mistake, but fortunately for us no 5-second time penalties have been dished out, which is a good thing. And quickly looking at the race order at the moment, you can see Solid Ninja doing a really good job, moving himself up into P5 in this race, coming down all the way from, what was it, P13, P14, so he had a monster start to this race, and some people actually decided to come into the pit lane for a pit stop, so they want to put on a fresh set of wet tires, whereas everyone in the top 5 essentially just decided to continue. Now this safety car restart wasn't the greatest, as you could see, struggling to get the tires up to temperatures and struggling to get a bit of grip coming out of the last corner. But something I really noticed throughout this race is the fact that I was much better than Tash on the braking. You could always see under heavy braking zones, I was just closing up a lot. Now, this corner here was also a corner Tash was really struggling with. Always gain time on him here. But the main problem is you can't really do anything in these wet weather conditions. DRS is not enabled, of course, so you can't really blaze past on a straight. You just basically have to make the move yourself on pure racing. And the difficulty here is the visibility is so bad. Every time you get within like 4 or 5 tenths, you just can't see any apexes anymore. And it was really tough to maintain a good pace and also stay without any track limit warnings. As I'm not entirely sure what this safety car was called out for. It's a full one, but nobody seemed to have retired, so not entirely sure what that one was for. Of course, we decided to stay out because at this point it's definitely a no stop until the end. And at this point I was getting quite annoyed of seeing the rear wing of that Williams over and over. Now at this restart we're all really close together, really close behind Tash, Solid's really close behind me, as once again we're closing up a lot in that braking zone. We can't entirely see where we're going, but Tash makes a bit of a mistake here, so this might be the opportunity to pass Tash in this race, but he just defends the middle of the track, which means you just can't go anywhere heading into this turn 3. If you defend that middle of the track, it's just so difficult to either send it around the outside or down the inside. And basically immediately after we just make a mistake here and we lose the pressure we put on Tash at the safety car restart. So really annoying, I couldn't make that move, and in my head I knew that was the only opportunity I would get unless Tash would make a really significant mistake in this race. So yeah, this was just so frustrating. I knew I had like maybe 3 more tenths on pure race pace than Tash, but I just couldn't utilize it. I was just stuck behind him for, well, the whole race essentially. So we're lap 26 now, and I'm just gonna show you a lap to see how frustrating it was to drive in these conditions, trying to overtake Tash. Now at this point I just sort of knew overtaking would be impossible, so I just tried to stay as close as possible to Tash for as long as possible in order to force him into some mistakes, hopefully pick up a track limits warning or at least something to happen. And yeah, I think you can see here I was definitely in a better place than Tash. I knew I had the pace advantage, so I was just trying to use my ERS as much as possible. Now it doesn't really look like I'm using ERS if you look at the bottom left, but I was just trying to use my ERS everywhere I could and try to put him under as much pressure as possible. And yeah, you can just see every time you get within 4 tenths, the apex just becomes invisible, and you need to go off of your memory basically to remember where exactly the track limits are and where the track goes, where you can find grip and where you could get on the power. So really difficult. Now this right-hander, I always struggle with this corner, but also in the wet here you can tell Tash was just getting better traction through there, and only the main overtaking opportunity was down into turn 3, and you can just see trying to get traction here, and he was just every time at least 3-4 tenths ahead of me. This is not like a very long straight, so you need to be at least like at 2 tenths or something. Just trying to show myself in the mirrors here. And yeah, that was a full lap of Australia around Melbourne here in full wet conditions. Basically there are no overtaking opportunities that present themselves, so the only thing I could do was just put pressure on Tash and hope he would crack under the pressure. And fortunately for me, you can see here he picks up his 3-second time penalty. Now this really was a blessing for me to know I would at least get 2nd place in this race, unless Tash will be able to get penalties removed, but I can confirm he actually picked up another warning on lap 28 here. So we're in a good position. Really frustrating race, couldn't do anything, was just looking at the rear wing of that Williams for the whole race. Wasn't under pressure from Solid at all, only under that safety car restart basically. Weeks just a really dominant display, pulling away, not getting fastest lap in the end actually, because I do believe, yes, exactly, Pasti picks up the fastest lap of the race, and in the end we finish in 2nd place in this race. Not too bad considering the lack of practice I had for this race, and considering the rainy conditions. Moving up 3 places is not too bad. Queek's really dominant display, good win by him. Solid Ninja, driver of the day for me. if you move up that many places in wet conditions, you're definitely doing something right. I've been picking up the scraps from Tash's penalty, and yeah, I really hope next week's race is a bit more exciting, and I'll see you for that one. See ya!